In this video, we'll be looking at how you can add branding to your sneakers or trainers. There are lots of different methods, and we will try to cover as many of these as we can during this tutorial. Preparation of your surfaces is key, whether you're using paint or decals. Surfaces like smooth leathers and synthetic leathers will have a clear top coat that will need to be removed. Suedes may have a coating applied to them to protect them from water and stains. This will also need to be washed away and dried thoroughly before applying any decals or paint to the upper. It's important to note that when things are stamped into suede and leather, it's very difficult to get a nice clean surface to work with. It is possible with alcohol and heat to smoothen out a suede surface that has been stamped, but it's probably best to use a different donor shoe for your project. Popular methods for removing branded logos and gold foil lettering would be to use solvents, acetone, or even an alcohol like isopropyl alcohol. Stubborn printed logos may require MEK, another solvent. These solvents are pretty bad for you, so it's a good idea to stay away from them if that's at all possible. Some logos can be removed with the craft iron tool. By using the edge of the iron head, you can heat up screen printed logos and rub them away. Using a pointed sharp object like the back of a scalpel or a needle, you can scratch away at foil lettering, and you can even sand with the fine grade sandpaper. In the tutorials today, we will have a look at using acetone. We will also look at using a steam kettle to remove lettering. When there is no decal or logo to remove, you still need to prepare the surface of the smooth leather by removing the top clear coat that has been applied to protect the leather. You can achieve some success by using isopropyl alcohol. The trick with any surface is not to rub away too much of the paint or pigment that has been applied to it. You just want to remove the logo. Generally, you can tell when you are starting to remove some of the base pigment or paint that you don't want to remove by seeing it on the bottom of the cotton bud. Don't worry too much, but don't go too far. A problem that is particular to some Adidas shoes is the type of screen print they apply to the heel tabs. It's very, very difficult to remove with acetone or with heat. You could try something like MEK, which is a stronger solvent, in order to remove it. Or I would suggest trying to overpaint them, or worst case scenario, you would need to get another pair of donor shoes. Removing the logos from smooth leather and synthetic leather is relatively easy using solvents most of the time. When using suede, things get a little bit trickier. In this clip, I'm using small amounts of acetone on a Q-tip. I'm just touching the top of the gold lettering, allowing the acetone to penetrate the glue underneath the foil. You may need to apply the acetone more than once to the top of the lettering, and when this is done, leave it for a moment, and then using your weeding tool, gently prise away the foil from the suede. You can make a simple weeding tool by cutting the head off a tailor's pin and inserting it into a piece of doweling or a pencil. If you work gently and carefully in this way, the surface of the suede won't become too distressed. Then you can use your crepe rubber to rub away excess foil. The problem with this method is that acetone can strip dye from suede, so you must work very carefully and keep an eye on whether you're creating dye stains. As you can see on these Q-tips, there is very little dye coming off, so I know when the suede is dry, the end result will look quite good. You won't really know what the suede will look like until you have allowed it to dry. Once it's dry, you can brush the nap up with a suede brush or with a crepe rubber. At this point, it's important to note that if your foil lettering has been stamped in, actually debossed into the suede, the fact that you're using alcohol or a solvent to remove existing lettering actually loosens the fibres of the suede itself, enabling you to pull some of that stamp out of the material. In addition to that, some of the glue may leave a darker patch in the suede, and you may need to disguise this by making sure that your new lettering is roughly the same size and shape as the previous lettering, and therefore disguises the fact that it was ever there. If you have a debossed piece of suede without any foil and you want to try and pull it out, it's a good idea to use a mix of isopropyl alcohol and water and let that soak into the suede, and then use a craft iron tool to gently heat the suede, and gradually over a period of time you may find that you will pull those fibres back into the natural state of being flat rather than debossed. There'll be more on using decals and lettering later on in this tutorial. So I'd really like to encourage you to try and get your head around and practice more than one technique for removing decals and lettering from shoes, because it's better to have an armory of skills than to just understand and operate with only one technique. In the next part of the tutorial, I will show you how you can use steam to remove the lettering, which is a really effective and quick way of removing the lettering without the worry of accidentally stripping dye from the shoes. So for me, the steam method of removing lettering from suede is probably the cleanest method, not only because it doesn't involve any acetones or sharp objects and things like that, but actually leaves a really good finish on the suede. For this method you will need a steam kettle. Steam kettles are used for cleaning upholstery and carpets, but also in shoe restoration for cleaning old vintage pairs and generally getting stains out. It's really good at heating up the glue though. And steam kettles are also used in the sole removal process by a lot of customizers and restorers. You need to fill your steam kettle with water and give it enough time for it to boil all the water inside so that you're only using steam. However, there will always be a bit of water as well, and the upper of the shoe will get wet. Do your best to stay away from areas of the shoe that may react to the heat, so away from the edges of the sole and also from plastic heel counters and toe puffs. It literally takes a handful of passes over the lettering for the steam to do its work. Already you can see that some of the letters are being loosened. It's a good idea to work with your crepe rubber in between steam bursts to remove debris. Commonly there are two parts to the lettering. There'll be the PVC or polyurethane foil on top of a layer of glue. You may find that you are just removing the top layer, and really what you want to do is also try to loosen the glue underneath. The crepe rubber is really good at sticking to glue, so use it to rub away those last bits of glue. And if you have any stubborn parts, you can also use your weeding tool to loosen them and pick them away. Now, as you can see, the results from this method look dramatically better than the results on the green Blackburn suede. However, it's important to note that the foil was sitting very much more on the surface and wasn't stamped in as much. But again, as we discussed before, using steam and heat and moisture, you can draw out the stamp from that suede. So this method can tick two boxes, flattening out the debossed stamp from the previous lettering, as well as removing the foil itself. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can use an acrylic transfer technique to add details to the heel areas of your shoes. It's a fairly simple technique and works on the principle that an acrylic varnish will suck the toner from a sheet of laser printed paper. For this technique, you will need some acetone or isopropyl alcohol to clear that top clear coat off the leather's surface. You'll also need a foam brush, a heat gun, and a bottle of clear acrylic varnish. We use the varnish because it dries very quickly, but the method can work with a neutral acrylic medium. It's a good idea to tear the logo from your printed paper out. When tearing the edges of the logo you're working on, you can reduce the ridges that may be left in the varnish itself. After preparing the leather surface, you're going to want to apply some of the acrylic to that. It's best to use a foam brush so that you get an even amount of varnish on the surface without any brush marks and build-up. I use the back of the foam brush just to take off some of the excess so I know that the surface is quite level. I'm going to apply some acrylic to the logo as well. Then you want to flatten it onto the surface of the leather, making sure there are no ridges and bumps anywhere. You will want to apply the logo in the correct position on the first attempt, as the varnish dries so quickly it will be very unforgiving. While the acrylic has not fully dried, we're going to wet the back side of the paper. The reason for this is that wetting it will help us to flatten it even more to the surface of the acrylic, making sure that every part of that toner image is touching the acrylic itself. You want to press firmly but not move the surface of the paper around too much. You may want to leave it for an hour or so to dry properly, or you could use a heat gun to speed the drying process up. Be sure that the paper has fully dried. Dampen your thumb or finger with water. Then gently rub away at the back of the paper. Be very careful here, you don't want to rub too hard. You're trying to remove the pulpy back side of the paper. This technique is very tricky and you will need to practice. I'm sure that there will be some successes as well as failures. As you remove fine layers of paper, go back with your heat gun and dry the acrylic once again. Repeat this process until you have removed as much of the paper as you possibly can. You may find that odd parts of the print may be missing. You can always touch these up with some leather paint. Once you're happy, you could take some fine grade sandpaper and lightly sand the top to remove any ridges, and then coat with a clear coat to seal in the work. I don't recommend using this process on very flexible parts of the shoe, as they may be more susceptible to cracking. In this next tutorial, we're going to look at how you can use stencils and paint to add logos and lettering to your shoes. Using stencils and paint with paintbrushes or airbrushes is one of the most common ways of customizing sneakers. It's a tried and tested method of adding details to shoes. The method can work very well on smooth leather, but also on suede to give it that deboss look. You will, however, need access to a plotter in order to cut your stencils. A lot of people use a service for this, maybe another customiser who will happily provide for a fee the designs that you need. The designs are normally cut onto a sticky film of some kind. Brands like Frisket Film have been around for a long time and used by airbrush artists all over the world. But you can also make some good stencils using masking tape and freezer or silicone paper. Today I'm going to be using a paintbrush and not an airbrush for this, but you can use either. Preparation is key once again, and you will need to take any top coat off of smooth leather by using some isopropyl alcohol or some acetone. with a cotton bud. You want to fix a strip of masking tape to the freezer paper and then feed that into your plotter. Cut your design using the plotter's software. Transferring your design can be a bit fiddly, so you can actually get tape for this. It's called transfer tape. Another solution would be to take the masking tape and make it less tacky by sticking it down multiple times on your table or desk. Make sure that you stick this down carefully on the upper exactly where you need it. The better that you stick this down, the less likely you are to have problems with paint going underneath the masking tape. You will want to carefully peel off that transfer masking tape. You may find that little details like the middles of O's and A's may need to be attached separately. Paint or spray your stencil with leather paint. Try not to overpaint and allow each coat to dry thoroughly before applying a second coat. This may take 3 coats if the paint is particularly thin, but be patient and wait for things to dry properly. You could use a heat gun to speed this process up. Carefully remove your masking tape and just check if there's any issues. You may need to touch things up slightly with a brush or maybe scrape off any tiny bits of paint with the tip of your weeding tool. And then finally you'll want to apply some kind of clear coat to the project to seal the paint. So in this tutorial we'll be looking at printable heat transfer film or papers, and we'll be showing you how to apply them to various parts of the shoe, whether it be the tongue or the heel area. These could be used to restore vintage sneakers, but also for making custom personalized shoes. You can design your own badges and have them printed to the material, either in-house or by a third party. But all of the methods can be applied at home using a craft iron tool. Printable heat transfer foils and papers come in a variety of types. The professional choice would be to use an eco-solvent printer and cutter. These are very expensive printers and cutters, and normally the film that you buy for these is on a roll, and you need to have a lot of technical ability in order to print them and to match colours correctly. But you can still print at home using a laser printer or an inkjet printer on papers. And there's some very good papers that are available and also suitable for printing on nylon and leather, which is the crucial thing. Of the Eco Solvent range, you can buy sizer papers. There's a Colour Print Extra range, which is suitable for printing onto nylon and leather. And from a company called Forever Transfers, you can buy A4 sheets of paper that are suitable to be printed with laser or with inkjet. It is possible to apply these heat transfers using a heat gun, although the combination of using heat and pressure from an iron would result in better adhesion to the surface you're working on. Whether you're using the professional films or you're using the Forever Transfer papers, they're available in clear transparent as well as in white backgrounds. A lot of the plotters and cutters will be able to cut your designs for you perfectly by using an optical eye in the print head. It is also possible to use a cheap hobby plotter and set registration marks in your print so that after printing you can actually cut out the designs perfectly. I tend to use a scalpel and a ruler to do this. I just find it much quicker. When using the clear transparent products, you do need to mirror the work because the print itself is placed face down onto the surface you're working on. With a white background, you peel this off and apply it to the surface and iron on top of that. Forever Transfer papers are available online, either by eBay or from various websites. You can buy sample packs of them, maybe 6 pieces of paper at a time. I favour the laser printed version, but you can get some great results from inkjet too. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to work with the Forever Transfer paper. This paper has been printed with a laser copier. We've done a Stone Roses lemon design. I'll show you how you can apply the clear paper as well as the white paper. The first thing you're going to need to do is to prep your surface. You want to cut out your design with some scissors or a scalpel if your plotter hasn't already done that for you. If working with the white background papers, you'll need to peel this off as this will be applied face up. If you're using the craft iron from my starter kit, you'll want to set it to setting 2. Using the silicone paper, press firmly down and hold it on each part of the transfer for a few seconds. You can always go back over certain areas if needed. When using the clear background, the print side is face down and there is no need to remove the backing at this stage. You'll need to press the clear background for much longer than the white background, at least 3 times the length of time. And even when you think it's stuck, you may find that you need to go back and repress certain areas. Make sure you take your time and make sure each area is firmly pressed to the surface. You will find that the clear films are harder to apply, they take longer and require more pressure. And it is a really good idea to test these products out on old shoes first. It must be said that in certain circumstances, a clear transfer may be what you need. When it does peel off, you can go back and give it another pressing. Sometimes you can get some ink bleed and transfer from these prints. It's a good idea to tidy round the artwork once it's been applied with a little bit of alcohol or solvent before applying any top coat, clear sealer or lacquer. To prepare your foam tongues, you're going to want to remove the existing badge by using cotton wool and acetone. Work from the outside into the middle to avoid spreading the design across the foam tongue surface. Your plotter can help by cutting out the badges for you, but I tend to favour using a scalpel and a ruler. I have even rounded the edge of one of my rulers so that I can cut nice curves on corners if necessary. Sometimes it's quite tricky to match the colours on a vintage badge, and so you might find it useful to print different saturations of the same badge and compare them. It's also important to note that after applying the heat transfer, the colour can change, and any clear coat applied can also alter the colour. Some people apply the transfers with a heat gun, but heat and pressure can really help the adhesion. Once you've applied the design, you're going to want to seal it in with a clear coat or lacquer. There is always going to be some wear and tear. You are printing onto the surface of a film or a paper, and the polyurethane that this thing is made of is very thin. The print will penetrate only so deeply. Even on the more professional films and papers, they do wear eventually. Let's take a quick look at some of the lacquers that you can purchase. A standard clear coat that you can buy at most DIY stores, whether it be a brand like Rust-Oleum or Plasticoat or Krylon, would be a very cheap option. Generally it's suitable as long as you don't over apply it, because it may not be as flexible as some others. You can also use a clear protector for artwork, such as this acrylic varnish by Liquitex. I like this a lot, but it does take a very long time to dry. One of my favourites, and still quite cheap, is to use an automotive spray. This is designed for spraying onto plastic parts of cars, and so it requires a little bit of flexibility, and it provides a nice matte finish. But probably the best, and unfortunately the most expensive, would be to use leather upholstery sealer. This is really designed to evaporate quickly, and it is also very, very flexible. All of these sprays have solvents in them. You could use your own brush-on sealant or an airbrush sealant. Whatever lacquer you use, make sure that if you're using solvents to use them in a ventilated area or wear a suitable mask. So in this tutorial we're going to look at how you can use wet slide decals to add some great logos and badges. Wet slide or water slide decal paper is made up of two layers. The top layer is a clear layer that you print on using inkjet or laser printers, and the bottom is a piece of white paper. We're going to be layering the water slide decal over the top of a metallic gold vinyl. This is the same material that we will be using in our vinyl decals tutorial. If you're using wet slide decal paper for inkjet printers, this will need to be sealed with some kind of lacquer or varnish before you submerge it into water. When you submerge the paper in water, the clear top layer with the print on it separates itself from the bottom paper. You can then slide the printed top layer onto another surface. When printing these with your printer, you may find you get mixed results. If you're using a sophisticated printer, it would be good to set it to a transparency setting. You will have to be very careful with positioning the decal, as the film itself is very thin, but you will want to get as much of it flat and as much of the water out from underneath it as you can. You may find that dabbing it with some kitchen roll will help dry it out. The instructions with the product generally state that you should leave it overnight. But I find that after an hour or so you can iron on top of it with some silicone paper to dry it out further. The ironing process seems to work very well in bonding the decal to the metallic vinyl underneath. Once again, we're going to need to use some clear coat sealant or lacquer on top of this, maybe 2 to 3 coats to ensure a good protective coating. So in this video we're going to be looking at using vinyl decals. We're going to show you what you need in order to make and apply them by yourself, although you can get people like myself to make the designs for you so that you can apply them at home. To make the decals at home yourself, you would need a vinyl plotter or cutter. You can use something similar to this, which is a silhouette portrait. It comes with its own software that you can use to make your designs. Using the software, I'm opening an image that I've already created in Photoshop. The image is then placed into my workspace. As you can see, it's very small. I want to trace this image and create cut lines from it, and the software works better if the image is bigger. It would allow me to get a more accurate trace. So I'm going to stretch this out a little bit. It's a very simple logo, so I should be okay. You can reach the trace function in the menu at the top, or you can reach it at the sidebar menu. Click the Select Trace Area button and then with your cursor draw around the object you want to trace. You have various options in the trace menu that you can adjust. The yellow colour will show you what the software will see and cut around. As I'm using line art, it is relatively simple. If you were going to use an image with lots of shades or different colours in it, then you may need to play with the adjustments slightly. Sometimes I find it very useful to separate images into different parts before importing them into the software. When I move the original image out of the way, you can now see where the cut lines are. These are the lines that will be sent to the cutter itself. I'll try to keep this tutorial fairly simple. We could always look at the software in more depth on another tutorial. It's useful to show you right now that the lines themselves are adjustable. You can double click the cut lines and change points, corners, curves, the whole shape if you wanted to, much in the same way that you would on any vector software. If you had shapes within shapes, you could ungroup these objects and separate them out and edit them separately before putting them all back together again. I'm going to reduce the size of my logo by dragging from one of the corners, and then using the object button in the menu bar, I'm going to mirror my design, because I'll be cutting on the adhesive side of the vinyl, which will be going face down onto the surface that I'm transferring to. I'm now ready to go to the send window. In this window you can adjust the cutter settings for the type of material you wish to cut, the speed and the pressure that it cuts at. But it's now time to get our vinyl ready for cutting. When I bought my cutter, it came with a cutting mat, which was essentially a piece of plastic with a tacky adhesive surface to it. I now use sheets of acetate that I spray with a repositionable photo spray, a bit like Spray Mount. This seems to work well, and it's a lot cheaper than buying brand new cutting mats. For this project I'm using some metallic vinyl. This vinyl is made by Sizer. It's called Easy Weed Extra, and it is designed to work on nylon and leather. Because it's designed for nylon and leather, it will work well on lots of non-porous surfaces. All of the metallic and coloured vinyl that I supply in my Etsy shop are Easy Weed Extra. I also supply gold and silver foil. This isn't designed for leather and nylon. However, it works very well on suede because suede has more of a natural key to it. You will want to place your sheet of vinyl with the adhesive side face up onto your sticky cutting mat and feed this using the feed button into your plotter. Once this is in place, you can click Send on the software menu. Your plotter will start to cut out your design now. If you're not sure if you've set up your plotter correctly, there is a test button which will cut a small shape in the corner of your material to test whether or not you have cut too deeply or too shallow. Now my design is cut, I'm going to weed the areas of vinyl that I don't require. I'm using my homemade weeding tool made with a tailor's pin and a piece of doweling. Weeding can be a tricky business. The transparent carrier film you see can sometimes be a non-sticky type, which is quite difficult to work with. These days, they seem always to be the sticky variety. But you will learn quickly what is cuttable and what is weedable, and alter your designs accordingly. You may often find, as I do, that it's useful to cut small details separately so that you can apply them to your design after the first decal. I'm now going to preheat my craft iron tool. I'm going to be using this red and black one, which has a digital setting and has a higher wattage than the blue and white ones that I sell with my starter kits. If I were using the blue and white one, I would be setting the switch to switch 2, which I believe is 10 watts of power, and the first setting would be 5 watts of power. You're going to need to leave your iron for a good few minutes so it can reach the maximum temperature for its setting. I find the digital setting of 7 or 8 is the equivalent of the second setting on the blue and white iron. You'll need to have your silicone paper ready. This silicone paper that I'm using is a baking parchment. You can buy silicone paper designed for use with heat transfers, but they're generally more expensive, and this works just as well and is available from most supermarkets. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to be applying this decal to the heel area of one of my handmade shoes. It is often a really good idea to preheat the surface that you're working on. This will help the decal to stick initially and keep it in place. Sometimes the decal can shift its position in the moments just before the heat is applied. It is also a good idea to do this because you're drying out the surface that you're working on. If a surface is too damp, the decal will take too long to stick. You should also note that if you've applied any kind of hydrophobic water repellent conditioner to the shoe, this may also affect whether or not your decal sticks properly. You will need to wash this stuff out and allow to dry before applying a decal. Once the decal is applied, you can recoat with any of these protective sprays. Place the decal down onto the surface. If you're working on a curved surface, you'll want to heat the center of the decal first. It may also be helpful to cut or snip the carrier film in certain parts to help it bend around a curved surface. Work systematically from the center of the decal to the outer edge. When applying pressure, keep the iron still and release the pressure as you move the iron to a different area. You may find that some areas are not sticking down, particularly if you're working on a curved surface. Don't worry. What you want to do is apply enough heat and pressure just to get that initial grab, and then you can remove the carrier film carefully. The carrier film itself is designed to be ironed, so don't worry if you want to apply the iron directly to this to press certain areas. Once you've removed the carrier film, it's much easier to apply the vinyl to the curved surface. You can gently iron over any small wrinkles to even them out. So in this part of the tutorial we will look at applying lettering. I'll be using foil lettering which is only suitable for suede. This is called Sizer PS Film or PS Foil. We'll be applying it to the shoe that we removed the lettering from previously using the steam method. I have created the lettering using the software provided with the plotter, and using the same method as before I have cut the foil. Weeding lettering is a little trickier because of the size of the decal. You will need to weed out those small details in the center of letter shapes. Position your decal to disguise where the existing lettering was if that's necessary. It's a good idea to use some folded card underneath to provide a stiff surface on which to press. This foil is a lot thinner than the Easy Weed Extra, and when applying it you will notice some differences. The foil decals have a tendency to slide around when the glue has melted, so when applying pressure do not move the iron across the surface. Again, you are looking for the initial grab of the glue, and then you can remove the carrier film and apply more pressure direct to the foil itself. It can be useful to press again with the silicone paper, but be aware without the carrier film, heat and pressure will be transferred to the foil a lot more easily, so do not apply too much pressure and only heat for a small amount of time. Sometimes you can see an outline of glue through the baking paper. This is an indication that the glue has melted and you should stop. The craft iron tool can leave dry patches. Simply wet your finger and dampen the area before brushing the nap up. It is possible to layer the vinyl decals used in these tutorials, and we will cover the designing and application of those in a future tutorial.